Tuesday, September 15th, 1981, was the first day of the new school year in Eching am Ammersee. A 10-year-old girl named Ursula Herrmann was quite excited to get back to her usual life after her summer break. After attending school, Ursula headed to her gymnastics class, from where she went to see her cousin. They had dinner together, and around 7:20 p.m., Ursula left for home on her bicycle. What was supposed to be a 10-minute journey through a dark forest turned into a mystery when Ursula didn't return home that night. Ursula's parents and other family members gathered and called her name through the woods, only to hear it echo. There was no reply, and little Ursula was nowhere to be found. What happened to Ursula that night? Was she in an accident, or was there a predator lurking in the woods? Welcome to Mysterious 7, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases from across the globe. Today, we'll be looking at the most disturbing case of Ursula Herrmann and how she came to be known as the Girl in the Box. The case had investigators puzzled for 27 years. Even to this day, there are still unanswered questions regarding what exactly happened in this infamous case. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe and like buttons. Now, without any further ado, let's dive into the case. In the far south of Germany, at the Alpine foothills, is a vast lake called the Ammersee. Centuries-old villages with scenic views are lined up along the shores of Ammersee. And at the north edge of the lake is a pair of two such villages called Eching and Schondorf. Their breathtaking terrain and waterfront restaurants are their greatest attractions. Separating the two villages is a block of spruce forest which attracts hunters, joggers, and mountain bikers. Wealthy families from Munich often buy second homes here for a weekend stay, while for youngsters it's the perfect getaway spot. One may get lost in the beauty of these villages, so much so that one might forget that almost 42 years ago, this was the setting for Germany's most shocking crime. Ursula Herrmann was born on November 24, 1970, in the state of Bavaria, Germany. She grew up in the village of Eching with her two older brothers, Michael and Hans, an older sister, and her parents, Anna-Louise and Michael Herrmann. Ursula's father was a teacher and her mother was a homemaker. At the age of 10, by September 1981, Ursula had grown up to be a lively and energetic girl. She had light-colored hair with bangs swaying just over her gleaming eyes. Ursula's oldest brother, Michael Herrmann, recalled praising Ursula's intelligence and sense of maturity. She had always been a little more mature than her friends. While her friends didn't shy away from being impulsive and wild at times, Ursula was always quite cautious about things, which was something surprising for a girl her age. Michael, who was 8 years older than Ursula, described Ursula as a cheerful and sensitive girl. She was a rule-abiding child and would often get a little frustrated when her peers did something that wasn't by the book. Ursula was also very athletic and hardworking. Once school was over, she'd attend tumbling and gymnastics lessons in the neighboring village. Ursula also enjoyed playing the piano with her brother Michael and was always ready to hop on her red bicycle to wander off. Little did Ursula know that on a fateful September night, she would take her last ride. Tuesday, September 15th, 1981, was the first day of the new school year in Eching. Ursula was looking forward to having an exciting day catching up with her friends at school. After a pretty normal day at school, she returned home by afternoon. As usual, Ursula and her brother Michael practiced playing the piano together, and by 5 p.m. in the evening, Ursula left for her gymnastics and tumbling lessons. She got on her bicycle and rode to Schorndorf, the neighboring village, where she attended her classes with her cousin who lived in Schorndorf. After that, Ursula decided to go to her cousin's place. Ursula and her cousin had a good time playing and chatting, which was followed by dinner with the rest of the family. At around 7:15 p.m., Ursula's mother called her sister, Ursula's aunt, who was hosting Ursula that night in Schorndorf. She asked her to inform Ursula that it was getting dark and she needed to get home immediately. Ursula left her cousin's home at around 7:20 p.m. on her bicycle. It was a short journey from Ursula's cousin's home in Schondorf to Ursula's home in Eching. Half an hour passed by, but Ursula never returned home. Ursula's mother called her sister again at around 7:50 p.m. and asked her about Ursula's whereabouts. Ursula's aunt now sounded worried. She said that Ursula had left about 25 minutes ago and should have reached home by now. Ursula's parents immediately understood that something was not right. It was only a 3-kilometer journey from Schondorf to Eching, and it should have taken Ursula merely 10 minutes to get back home. The path from Schondorf to Eching ran through a spruce forest, commonly known as Weingarten, and alongside the Lake Ammersee. Ursula had taken this path multiple times before. She was very familiar with it, and there was almost no possibility of her getting lost in the forest. Ursula's parents and brothers were worried sick. Ursula's father went out to search for her in the forest himself. Ursula's uncle did the same, leaving from his home in Schondorf toward the spruce forest. They called out Ursula's name many times, but their voices would only fade into the distance. Rushing through the woods, Ursula's father and uncle met midway with no signs of Ursula. Ursula's father had informed the authorities, and about half an hour later, around 8:35 p.m., the forest was filled with multiple police officers and a few sniffer dogs looking for Ursula. Search parties consisting of police officers, firefighters, and some helpful neighbors were formed, which skimmed through the forest to look for any signs of Ursula. At around 11:15 p.m., a sniffer dog led the police officers to Ursula's red bicycle. It was found about 20 meters away from the path, but Ursula was still nowhere to be found. The dog didn't pick up any further trail from the spot, which suggested that Ursula was carried from this point onwards. Since the bicycle was found away from the lake and more towards the forest, the police canceled out the possibility of Ursula being in an accident. As the night kept getting darker, a heavy rain started to pour. With their flashlights on in the pitch dark, dozens of police officers in raincoats and rubber boots scoured through the forest looking for the little girl till the break of dawn. Police boats and divers were brought in as well to conduct a thorough inspection of the lake. A helicopter, too, was deployed to scan the forest from above. Local radio carried the shocking news of the missing girl, along with her description. 4 feet 7 inches tall, with short blonde hair, wearing dark green cords, a gray woolen cardigan, and a pair of red-brown sandals. Sadly, even after an intense search, there were no traces of Ursula. About 36 hours after Ursula's disappearance, on Thursday morning, September 17, 1981, the Hermans received a morbid phone call. Ursula's father answered the telephone, and there was no response. Over the next few hours, 3 more cryptic calls were made to Ursula's home. That's when the police set up their station inside the Herman residence and started to record the calls. In almost every call, the Hermans would hear this. The caller remained silent throughout the call and then hung up. Only a jingle played 2 times in a row for 3 seconds each time. Towards the end of the call, a weird tapping sound was noticed as well. It sounded like someone was rewinding a tape recorder, but the police weren't sure. However, the Hermans were quick to recognize the jingle that was played on the call. The jingle was used for a traffic bulletin on Bayern 3 radio station. Still, no one could figure out what the calls meant. On Friday, September 18th, 3 days after her disappearance, a postman delivered a letter to Ursula's home in the morning. Ursula's father opened the envelope, which was marked urgent. He found a ransom note inside it. The note was written in broken German with words cut out from newspaper articles. It translated to, "We have kidnapped your daughter. If you ever want to see your daughter alive again, then pay 2 million Deutschmarks as ransom. If you call the police or do not pay, we will kill your daughter." The note also ordered the Hermans that if they agreed to pay, they must confirm it on the call after the jingle played. It turned out that there was an unforeseen error made by the post office. The kidnappers had expected the letter to arrive a day earlier, and that's why the calls were made on Thursday, as the kidnappers were expecting the Hermans to respond to their ransom note. The same afternoon, the kidnappers called Ursula's home again. Ursula's mother answered this time, and, as planned, after the jingle played, she confirmed that she and her husband had agreed to pay the ransom money. While on the call, she asked the kidnappers for proof that Ursula was still alive. She asked them, "What are Ursula's two soft toys called?" The caller remained silent. Ursula's mother yelled, "Talk to me, say something, something from Ursula." The caller hung up without uttering a single word. Unlike some other residents of Eching, and the parents of the children at the boarding school in Schondorf, the Hermans were not very well off financially. They didn't have any wealthy relatives or friends either. A thoughtful neighbor stepped in and raised some of the money to help the Hermans. The local government paid the rest of the money. On Monday, September 21st, 1981, the Hermans received a second ransom note. This one contained the instructions for the transfer of the ransom money. The note asked the family to pay in used 100 Deutschmark bills packed into a suitcase. The kidnappers also said that Ursula's father would be the one who would carry out the whole process. Ursula's father was to deliver the ransom money alone and drive a yellow Fiat 600 no faster than 90 kilometers per hour, which is equivalent to 56 miles per hour. The police thought that the car requirement was quite odd, as the Fiat 600 was rarely available in Germany at the time. The note also ordered the Hermans to wait for further instructions on the date and location of dropping off the ransom. The family and the police waited patiently for further instructions. 2 weeks went by, and there was still no word from the kidnappers. Ursula's family grew more and more worried as time passed, as their minds filled up with morbid thoughts. The Hermans feared the worst. On October 1st, 1981, since the Hermans had not been contacted by the kidnapper for days, the police decided to search the spruce forest again. This time, more than 100 police officers and 10 sniffer dogs spread out throughout the forest with hopes of finding any clues, or just something they may have missed out before. The force was divided into grids, and the police searched every grid one by one using metal detectors to search the forest floor. The search went on for 4 days, and on October 4th, 1981, at 9:30 a.m., an officer stumbled upon a clearing in the forest about 800 meters away from the path running next to the lake. When he further inspected the area, he struck something beneath the ground. He notified all the other officers in the area, who soon joined him in the clearing. It appeared like someone had tried to cover the area with 5 small spruce trees to act as a barrier. The officers started digging and found a brown blanket. When they removed it, they discovered a wooden board beneath it, which seemed to look like the lid of a wooden box. The lid was removed, and under was another wooden board, but this one was painted green. It was 72 centimeters in length and 60 centimeters in width. It was bolted down with 7 sliding bolts. The officers pried it open and took a look inside. Ursula's cold and lifeless body was found inside the wooden box, 19 days after she went missing. The officers themselves cried as they pulled Ursula's body out of the box. Ursula's parents were immediately informed about the discovery. It was an extremely painful moment for the Hermans, and now they only wanted to see the culprit behind bars. Ursula's mother asked if Ursula had been harmed or tortured before her death. The police couldn't answer that question at that point, and sent Ursula's body to a mortician for a detailed examination. The officers wasted no time in examining the box. It weighed about 60 kilograms and was found buried in the ground in an upright position, like a phone booth. The box was 1.4 meters deep, which is about 4 feet 6 inches. It had a makeshift seat which doubled as a toilet and had a bucket of water placed under it. In front of the seat was a shelf which served as a desk. The police also found 12 cans of Fanta, 6 large chocolate bars, 3 bottles of water, 4 packs of biscuits, 2 packs of chewing gum, an apple juice box, a portable light, and a radio turned to Bayern 3 station. A set of 21 comic books was found in the box as well. These comics included Donald Duck, romance, thriller, and Western stories. The investigators also found a bell wire hanging on the nearby trees. The box was also fitted with a poorly constructed venting system made using plastic plumbing pipes. One end went down till the ground level, and the other opened just above the box to provide a passage for air to pass through. But this system required a pump or a fan to function properly and circulate the air. In the absence of the pump, the oxygen inside the box would completely be exhausted, leaving the air composed of only carbon dioxide. When the officers found Ursula's body, she was placed on the makeshift seat with her head tilted backwards and her eyes closed. There was a plastic bag resting on her lap which had a tracksuit inside. The autopsy report came back and confirmed that Ursula wasn't harmed or tortured in any way before her death. The report also stated that she died within 30 minutes to 5 hours after initially being buried. The investigators believe that Ursula was drugged before being put into the box, as there were no signs of struggle or resistance in the box. The box was examined, and no scratch marks or breaks in the internal lining of the box were found. There were no needle marks on Ursula's body, and no drugs were found in her system. The medical examiners believed that kidnappers must have used nitrous oxide to knock Ursula unconscious, but since there were no tests for this at the time, they couldn't confirm this theory. The pathologist found 2 discolored stains on either side of Ursula's larynx, but this was not looked into any further for reasons unknown. A few days after her body was found, Ursula was laid to rest in her hometown Eching. Her family was heartbroken. At Ursula's funeral, the reporters even harassed the family. Ursula's brother Michael knocked a camera to the ground when a reporter held a camera in his face at the funeral. Upon examining the box further, the police were able to extract a fingerprint found on one of the pieces of duct tape and a DNA sample from a tiny strand of hair found curled up around a screw. They also believed that since the box weighed about 60 kilograms, there were likely at least 2 people involved, as it would be extremely difficult for a single person to carry a box that heavy. The police were working extensively to track down Ursula's kidnappers. They issued a reward of 30,000 Deutschmarks for anyone who could provide any information that could lead to the arrest of the kidnappers. In the following days, a bunch of tips came in. Most of them pointed the police towards a man named Werner Mazurek. Mazurek lived with his wife and 2 children just a few hundred meters away from the Hermanns. Mazurek was a 31-year-old man and a trained car mechanic. He was tall, strongly built, and known for his short temper. When the police further looked into him, they found that Mazurek was in mounting debt of 140,000 Deutschmarks. A week after Ursula's body was found, Mazurek was interrogated by the police. At first, he couldn't provide an alibi when the police asked him about his whereabouts on the night of Ursula's disappearance. But the next day, he told the investigators that he was playing board games with his wife and 2 friends when Ursula went missing. The police did a thorough search of Mazurek's house, but found nothing that could link him to Ursula's abduction. A month later, they compared Mazurek's fingerprints to the one found on the piece of tape found at the crime scene. However, the fingerprints were not a match. The police were still not convinced that Mazurek was innocent, and so didn't let him off the hook. In January 1982, Mazurek was arrested along with 2 of his friends. The police questioned him and his 2 friends for several days, but soon they were all released without any charges. About a month later, the police interrogated a man named Klaus Pfaffinger. Pfaffinger was an unemployed mechanic and an acquaintance of Mazurek. Pfaffinger was questioned because his landlord told the police that he'd seen Pfaffinger riding on his moped with a spade tied to the side a few weeks before Ursula's disappearance. Initially, Pfaffinger claimed that he was innocent, but on the second day of questioning, he told the police that Mazurek had asked him to dig a hole in the forest back in September 1981, and in return, Mazurek had promised him 1,000 Deutschmarks and a television. Pfaffinger also admitted that he later saw the hole filled with a box. The investigators were excited as they thought they were close to cracking this case. However, when they asked Pfaffinger to lead them to the site where he dug the hole in the forest, Pfaffinger failed to locate the spot. He also then recanted his statement and was released without any charges. In 1982, 2 students from a nearby boarding school came to the police with a bell wire. The students told them that about 8 months after Ursula's disappearance, they discovered this wire in the spruce forest while chasing an owl. They took it down and kept it in a locked box in their dormitory. The police came to a conclusion that the kidnappers must have used this wire as an alarm system in Ursula's disappearance. They theorized that one of the kidnappers would have used the system to alert the other through a buzzer or a light bulb attached to the other end of the wire when they spotted a potential victim. Desperate to make progress and discover more clues in Ursula's case, the investigators took a look at all the evidence again. They found the impression of a mathematical probability tree on one of the ransom notes. This made the police lean towards the idea that the kidnappers might be from a younger age group. They also thought that this could be the work of a few students as well. Even though this did narrow down the list of potential suspects a little bit, it wasn't a clue solid enough to lead them to anyone specific. The investigators also noted that one ransom note had been posted from Landsberg and the other from the greater Munich area, 20 kilometers to the west and east of the crime scene, respectively. It also seemed highly likely that the ransom calls were made from a phone booth. The detectives made very little progress by following these dead-end leads, and eventually, the investigation slowly lost its pace, and the case went cold. After lying cold for 22 years, the investigators decided to reopen Ursula's case in 2004. They went over all the suspects and studied each and every clue again in the hopes of finding any new leads. With new technical advancements in the DNA technology, the investigators were successful in obtaining a DNA profile made from the DNA sample extracted from the strand of hair found at the original crime scene. In 2007, it seemed like the investigators' hard work had paid off. The DNA profile built from the sample matched one of the other profiles in the law enforcement's DNA database. The sample matched the profile of a man named Benedikt Toth from Munich. Benedikt was already on trial for murdering his aunt, Charlotte Bohringer, a rich garage owner, in 2006. However, Benedikt was eliminated as a potential suspect because during the investigation in 2007, Benedikt was 33 years old, which meant that at the time of Ursula's kidnapping in 1981, he would have been only 7 or 8 years old. The investigators were disappointed. They'd made an error while developing the DNA profile, which had led them to obtaining an impure result. Under German law, Ursula's case was not considered a murder. Instead, it was termed as a kidnapping with accidental death. And so, the case had a statute of limitations of 30 years. Time was running out for the investigators to solve Ursula's case. They only had 4 years left to put the kidnappers behind bars, or else the kidnappers would be free and could no longer be held accountable for the crime they had committed all those years ago. The investigators took another look at the original suspects from 1981. They couldn't investigate Pfaffinger as he'd already passed away in 1990. The investigators believed that Pfaffinger's initial statements about digging a hole for Mazurek were true. He knew some specific details about the case, such as the dimensions of the box. According to the police, only someone who took part in the crime could know these details. However, Pfaffinger's DNA sample was not a match to the hair found at the crime scene. Since Pfaffinger was no longer around to be part of the new investigation, the investigators started to keep tabs on Mazurek. They tapped his phone and even sent an undercover agent to befriend him. A few months later, the investigators showed up at Mazurek's house and a DNA sample was taken from him. When the lab results came back, it turned out that Mazurek's DNA sample wasn't a match either to the hair found at the crime scene. The investigators searched Mazurek's house and recovered an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. A sound expert was hired and was given the original recordings of the jingle from 1981. The sound expert was told to examine this tape recorder and figure out whether it was used to record those jingles years ago. For months, the sound expert spent hours conducting tests on and examining the recorder. He claimed that the recorder had a technical defect which caused the recording to be distorted. This distortion was also present in the original recordings of the jingle from 1981. The expert concluded that the recorder found at Mazurek's home was most likely the one used to record and play the jingle back in 1981. On May 28, 2008, Mazurek was arrested on the charge of kidnapping Ursula Herrmann. Mazurek's trial began in February 2009 and took place in the regional court of Augsburg. In Germany, families can present as co-plaintiffs in trials. Both of Ursula's parents were approached to do so, but they rejected this idea, as neither of them wanted to relive the pain and trauma of their daughter's passing. However, Michael, Ursula's oldest brother, stood in as a co-plaintiff. He had the access to review all the evidence, information, and investigation notes. He was also allowed to stand in and ask questions to the judge and witnesses. Michael, a music teacher, did not stand for half-truths. Michael went through 6,000 pages of the case file during the first few weeks of the trial. Mazurek pleaded not guilty, and most of the evidence against him was circumstantial. The prosecutors argued that Mazurek had the motivation to commit the crime, as he was drowning in debt at the time of Ursula's kidnapping. And since he was a repairman, it would have been an easy job for him to build the box. The prosecutors also brought up Mazurek's previous criminal records for fraud and forgery. To highlight Mazurek's short temper and outrageous behavior, the prosecutors disclosed an incident where Mazurek had killed a dog back in 1974. The dog had littered trash on the kitchen floor from the dustbin. Mazurek then grabbed the dog and locked it in the basement freezer. When his wife went to get some meat from the freezer, she found the dog frozen to death. But the most important move that the prosecution had came from two slightly controversial pieces of evidence. First was the sound expert's statement about the tape recorder. Mazurek defended himself, saying he'd bought that tape recorder from a flea market just a few weeks before his house was searched. However, Mazurek failed to prove this, as he couldn't lead the authorities to the person who sold it to him. Also, no one at the market seemed to believe that the recorder was even sold there. Second was Pfaffinger's confession. The prosecution believed that Pfaffinger's original statement was credible. They said that Pfaffinger deliberately failed to lead the police to the site where the box was found to mislead the investigators so they'd release him. Prosecutors also confirmed that when Pfaffinger gave his statement in 1981, he knew some details of the crime scene, such as the size of the box and the description of the burial site. In 2010, all the arguments put forward by the prosecution convinced the jury to charge Mazurek with the abduction of Ursula Herrmann. Mazurek was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Mazurek's wife was also on trial for being an accomplice to the crime, but was let off the hook due to a lack of evidence. While many were happy that the case had finally been solved and the culprit was behind bars, Michael, Ursula's brother, was not convinced of Mazurek's guilt. Michael was not sure that Mazurek was involved in Ursula's abduction. Michael didn't think that Pfaffinger's statement was a credible source of evidence, as he was a known alcoholic and used to experience hallucinations while in custody. Michael brought up the fact that Pfaffinger changed his story several times when he was questioned. Michael also believed that Pfaffinger got the specific details of the box and the burial site through media coverage. Michael tried to get the case reopened, but the court didn't agree to this. Michael then came up with a plan. In 2013, Michael filed a civil claim against Mazurek for 20,000 euros on the grounds that Mazurek had caused him tinnitus as a result of psychological trauma from the case and the trial. Michael thought that this would cause the court to re-examine the case, as Mazurek would claim that he was wrongly convicted and was not liable for the damages. But in August 2018, the court ordered Mazurek to pay 7,000 euros to Michael for causing his tinnitus and stuck to the verdict that Mazurek was guilty. The trial did take a toll on Michael. His health deteriorated, his career had taken a hit, and he'd separated from his wife. For Michael, Ursula's case was far from being solved. But he couldn't give up on chasing after the truth. Even though Mazurek was sentenced for Ursula's abduction, there were still many people, including Michael, Ursula's oldest brother, who believed that Mazurek was wrongly convicted. This thought stemmed from the fact that the police were quite clumsy when investigating the original crime scene. A few mistakes that were made by the investigators, including how Pfaffinger's statement was never recorded or written down when he confessed. Instead, an unsigned statement was written down weeks later by an officer based on his recollection of Pfaffinger's interrogation. Pfaffinger's wife, too, stood up for him. She told the police that Pfaffinger was an alcoholic. He would have been too lazy to dig a hole that big for Mazurek. The public also brought up the point that when the box was found, the police didn't cordon off the crime scene immediately. And since the reporters and the public could freely access the crime scene, any footprints that might have been left behind by the kidnappers would have been lost. In addition to that, the brown blanket that was found covering the lid of the box was handed to a junior officer, who then took it home and put it in the laundry. Any evidence that could have been retrieved from the blanket had also been washed away. The public believed that since the clock was running out, the police followed the concept of a wrong convict being better than no convict and charged Mazurek for Ursula's abduction based on circumstantial evidence. Even today, Ursula's case is considered a kidnapping with deadly consequences. Many believe that by putting Mazurek behind bars, the police failed Ursula and her family. Ursula was a girl full of energy and laughter whose journey was sadly cut short. She was robbed of her chance at a joyful life. To this day, Michael contests Mazurek's guilty verdict and wants solid answers. He's still trying to get the case reopened and even wrote a letter to the court saying, "I'm not convinced of his guilt, but neither am I convinced of his innocence." Ursula's case has been officially closed, but it's still not confirmed who truly kidnapped Ursula on that unfortunate September night in 1981. What do you think of Mazurek's guilty verdict? Was he rightly convicted? Had Pfaffinger still been around, do you think he would have stuck to his original statement? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and thanks for watching.